We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about marriage this morning. We have not spoken on the topic for a little while. It is something that should be spoken on at least a couple of times per year. And we'll cover it from quite a few different aspects. But I'm going to start off by giving you just a few, as we start, of the statistics that I found as of recent polls. And I'll give you some more as we continue to work through this. But according to a recent poll, a 2024 poll, the biggest factor for getting married is no longer love, which I find extremely interesting. Only 36% of people polled said they actually recently got married, and the reason was love. 39% of newlyweds polled cited a generalized statement of companionship, but 42% said the reason they got married was financial security. That was the basis or sole reason for which they got married. Let me give you some other information, because when you start to combine that information, for example, by stating that the initial reason in which you got married was not really the correct reason, and you begin to look at some other facts, you can see why maybe we're struggling. 73% of Americans polled recently believed that divorcing your spouse was morally acceptable. There was no problem with that. 35%, this is a 2024 poll, 35% of married individuals actually believed that pornography was perfectly acceptable. And this one really scared me. 67% of men aged 18 to 49 believe pornography is morally acceptable. And the reason that one's so disturbing to me is that is 14 points higher than last year's poll on whether or not pornography was acceptable according to men. That number has significantly jumped. So we're no longer talking about what was once shameful and hidden. We are now talking about, especially with internet usage and common culture, things that are easily accessible and now are viewed as normal. So you take all of that information in, people marrying for reasons other than love, their views on, just for example, things like pornography and divorce, and you begin to look at that and you could say, well, we could see why there are so many problems that are struggling. The only poll that I actually found that really had improved was the divorce rate. Recent polls actually show that 35 to 39% of all marriages end in divorce. That number has slightly gone down. Some have actually reported that the divorce rate within the churches of Christ is about 6.9%. However, the problem with that statistic is an awful lot of people leave the church before they ever get divorced, and so you don't really have that information. And the other side of it is you've got the stigma of those who actually were divorced, but it was for a biblical reason of putting their spouse away for unfaithfulness. And so when you begin to look at that, the numbers within the church are pretty hard to actually calculate. But my point is this, as we begin to look it out, there's an awful lot of problems within marriages, and marriages are struggling both within the church and outside of the church. And for the most part, I would say that oftentimes it is because they don't know what's expected of them. The flip side is there's some who do know what's expected of them, but they really don't care. We're not going to look so much at the side that doesn't care. We're going to look for those of us who do care, whether we're Christians or non-Christians, and we're going to begin to focus on if we do care, and we do want to either prepare ourselves to be in a good marriage, or if we want to protect the marriage we're currently in, what are the things that we can do? Let's start off talking about, for a second, the option and the purpose of marriage. The Bible doesn't command anywhere that you get married, and there are certain people that will never marry, and there's not a problem with that. As a matter of fact, we know that when you get married, it brings all kinds of additional problems, and some people want to avoid those problems, and they choose to never become married. However, Paul knew that if we do marry, and sometimes we need to, there's going to be more problems, but Paul realized there's a valid purpose for marriage. Let's go on over to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and Paul make this very clear. Yes, there is a purpose for marriage, but if you get married, you're going to have additional issues. And I would say we all agree with that. 1 Corinthians 7, I'm going to read verses 1 to 5. Paul says, "Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, To avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Well, obviously, at least to me, one begins to think about getting married when they feel like they're beginning to fall into love with somebody. I would say for those of us who are all married, that's probably not an unusual aspect. Maybe for some in this culture today, that's not the reason they're looking to get married. But for most of us, I would say that was the reason. And Paul says, well, it's fine if you're single, but if you're single and you're being tempted to commit fornication, or you're single and you're desiring to get closer emotionally and intimately, and it was touched on this morning, I think actually during Bible study, you want to get closer emotionally and intimately with a person of the opposite sex, Paul makes it clear, you should get married. If you find yourself in this position where you can't control yourself, and you don't feel like, or you're wanting to get closer to this spouse, there's a reason for you to get married, right? Unfortunately, that's not the standard conclusion that many would draw today within our culture. Recent polls show 70% of unmarried Americans live with a partner, and not surprisingly, almost 90% of Americans have had intimate relations, we use the biblical term fornication, before they are married. There's your general statistic. 70% of Americans are living with someone whom they are not married to, and over 90% of them are having intimate relations prior to being married. Paul says this was a problem. It was a problem in the first century. It's still a problem today. Now, I won't spend much time on it, but for those of us who have studied this before, we know. But if you're not sure exactly what fornication is, and again, I'm always trying to be very careful, but fornication is describing the sexual acts between two unmarried individuals, which includes the genitals. And Paul says, in order to avoid this sin, and they would have known what he was talking about, each husband or each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. So, what was Paul saying? Well, he understood this was going to affect both men and women. And I know oftentimes guys get the bad rap, right? This is a guy problem. No, this is a general problem that affects both men and women. That desire works both ways, and Paul knew this. And so he says, if this is an issue, men, you should have your own wives, and women, you should have your own husbands, and that will solve this problem. Paul also knew that this was going to be a problem both prior to marriage and after marriage, and that's why Paul talks about the very fact that they were to basically yield themselves one to each other, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. But he says don't refrain yourself or don't withhold yourself from your spouse. They were both to render, he words it quite eloquently, I would say. He says they were to render due benevolence to the other spouse. Now here's what's interesting. I went back and spent some time. How would if I was going to render that from the Greek into the English, is that the way I would use it? When I went back and spent some time, I don't think I would render it quite that way. I don't know if any of you guys ever do benevolence later. I don't think you guys. Here's what the Bible actually says. If you were going to literally translate this, I think, from the Greek into the English, you would literally translate this as to render your obligated goodwill. That would be one way to literally translate that phrase. It is the goodwill that takes place between married partners, and it is an obligation that you've agreed to when you got married. That's technically what the words say. Or you could phrase it this way, to fulfill the marriage obligation regarding intimacy. That obligation is further declined down in verse 4 as Paul's talking to the Corinthians, where he shows that bond, that marriage bond, actually provides equal and necessary access to each spouse. So it works both ways. He's not picking one or the other. And that's why I said oftentimes guys will get the bad rap, but it works both ways. So you don't have to get married, and Paul points that out, but he says if you're being tempted, you should get married. You should have your own spouse. And included in that marriage bond is the agreement that spouses are going to provide for the other spouse's intimate needs, which means we need to know an awful lot about our spouse. Now, we'll touch on this here a little bit later, but there's an awful lot of things we need to know. And here's a very startling statistic I came across, and I won't spend too much time on statistics, but I do want to be realistic. Recent studies, this was a poll as of this year, shows there is a decline actually in the rate of intimacy among married couples. In 2021, 26% of married couples under 60, they were intimate with each other only one time a month. And another study published in 2019 found that about 47% of married couples, no age was given on that, are intimate less than once a week. And what's interesting is they're actually finding that has been significantly dropping pretty much year over year. Well, Paul says in verse 7 that we're not to, he says to defraud ye not one the other, except for consent, for a time of fasting and prayer. And then he says to come back together. Now, here's what's interesting. Many marriages, they do not discuss their needs at all regarding intimacy or very other personal issues. And I think the reason sometimes is because people are extremely shy. We'll touch on that. Or the other reason is the partner just thinks they know. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. According to the statistics, that's not normally the case. They don't. So we are not having, as a whole, and I'm going to give you the numbers to prove it, we are not having intimate discussions with our spouses so that we know them. And I love how the Bible uses that phrase, he knew her not, talking about intimately. We are not having the discussions with our spouses oftentimes so that we can know them on the utmost, the best basis that we could as spouses. We're not doing an effective job here. According to a recent survey, not only are 80% of women putting their health last after their children, their spouses, and even their pets, the poll went on to say 62% of women admitted they were not satisfied with the quality of intimacy with their spouse. And 60% said it was not frequent enough. And it's interesting that the poll continues to show that that's going down more and more and more. And here's what I also found interesting. There was a separate poll that said 46% of men said they also were dissatisfied. And again, the primary complaint was frequency. Now, you may look at those two polls, 62% of women, 46% of men, and you say that shows me we have an awful lot of unhappy marriages, but our divorce rate's not that high. So why is that? I thought about that. Well, the reason the divorce rate's not that high is because, one, either they're not telling their spouses about it and they're just suffering through it, or two, they do tell their spouses, but their spouses aren't making a change, and again, they just suffer through it, and they accept mediocre or very bad intimacy within their marriage. And most of us probably know people who are married and they live like they are roommates. And I'm surrounded by lots of people within the workplace and things like that where I hear them talk, and that's exactly what they're going through. Some are married and living like roommates. Some are living with someone who they call their partner. And again, it's to the point where of course, they shouldn't be doing that. I'm not condoning it. And again, they're in the same situation, okay? Here's what I find interesting. They're not willing to talk about the most intimate things with their spouse, and yet we don't have any problem coming home and talking about the very mundane things like, did you pick up noodles for dinner tonight? Did you pick up brats for later in the week? Did you take the dog to the vet? Right? We talk about all of those things. And we don't think anything about it. And yet we don't talk about the things that are literally destroying and pulling apart our marriages. So the Bible makes it very clear we need to have regular intimacy within the marriage, but it needs to be intertwined with emotional closeness of friendship between spouses. Again, we talk about that one flesh, and I'm going to focus in on that in a minute. That's a lot more than just the physical. That's talking... I can't give the description of how two souls unite, but that's exactly what we're trying to do. And it's interesting that the poll actually shows that. I found a poll this week as I was studying yesterday morning. which says that the quality of the spouse's friendship, how close you are as friends, is 70% the deciding factor on whether or not you are satisfied with the intimacy within your marriage. Let me say that again. The deciding factor on whether you are happy with the intimacy in your marriage is based on whether or not you are very close friends apart from the passion side and the intimacy side. That doesn't surprise me, because when you begin to talk about being one flesh and what's involved, that's clearly physical, but there's so much more than that, and I'll touch on that here in a minute. The whole point is this, and we get it when you begin to look at what the Bible teaches. The emotional connection between spouses is what drives the intimate connection. And when you remove one side or the other, it is off balance. And we wonder why so many marriages are struggling. Well, again, it's the removal oftentimes of the emotional connection apart from the intimate side. And that's especially a problem for women. For anybody who's gone back and looked at the statistics, you'll know. Let's go on over to 1 Corinthians 7. We'll look at 8 through 13. Paul says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide, even as I. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband, but, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband. Let me say this real quick, and I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I want to point this out for anybody who is watching this, because this passage is mistaught all the time. And I didn't put any notes in here, but let me point it out. He says, and unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. Okay, so she shouldn't leave him. But, and if she depart, because a lot of times people say, well, once they leave, it's okay. Let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband. She's still married to him whether she leaves or not. That's a whole other study we need to talk about. I'm not suggesting there's not an avenue for a scriptural divorce, but he's making it very clear that if you're not divorced for a scriptural reason, you're still married. Otherwise, he wouldn't still be saying to be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband put away his wife, but to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. So Paul makes it very clear as we start to look at this entire passage as a whole. If you're married, that's fine. If you're unmarried and you want to stay that way, that is fine. But if you are married, Paul declares here the permanency of that marriage bond. And he says, wives, don't leave your husbands. Husbands, don't put away your wives. And what he's saying is if you're having problems within your marriage, which many of them in the first century were because of their faith, Paul basically says you need to divorce-proof your marriage. And I would go so far as to say in today's environment, you need to divorce-proof your marriage and you need to affair-proof your marriage. And I'm going to give you some statistics here in a little bit, ones I had not given before. So we've made it very clear as we start off. Let's talking about the option and purpose for marriage. There is a option. You can be married or not be married, but there's also a purpose for marriage. And Paul makes it very clear if you can't control yourself and you're either going to commit the act of fornication with this person or if you're not able to control yourselves, you should have your own spouse. Now let's talk about the standard for purity. Now I'm going to go over to Exodus 20:14. Where it says there, thou shalt not commit adultery. And you may be saying, well, that's an Old Testament verse. We're not bound by the Old Testament. Don't worry, I'm going to give you some New Testament verses here in a minute. But my point in using the Old Testament verse was this has always been a standard for God's people. It was a standard under the law of Moses. It's a standard for those under the law of Christ. And God had given this command to the Jews for a number of reasons. One was to preserve the morality of his people, to preserve the family unit, which was really the basis of Jewish society. And it was also to maintain the structure within the family, which teaches the sons and the daughters what mothers and fathers and husbands and wives are to look like and how they are to function. So there's a necessity for both husband and wife to be present as mothers and fathers for the function of teaching their children. Many people today, and I don't have the statistics and I'm not going to try to, many people today were raised in dysfunctional households where they were taught dysfunctional marriages, and that's what they know. God was trying to stop that in the beginning. We're trying to do the same thing as Christians. And we mentioned it this morning. So we need to break that cycle. If we've got those issues, we need to break it now, because there are future generations that are watching us and learning wrong. And many of us will admit we were taught wrong and we've made the same mistakes. We don't want our children to do it. This is just a few of the reasons why the followers of God remain faithful to their spouses. And Jesus goes back and he reconfirms this teaching to not commit adultery. And then he takes it to a whole nother level. And we touched on this morning in Bible study, where many of these Jews within their mind thought, I know the physical act, and Jesus says it's a whole lot more than that. Matthew 5, verses 27 through 28. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old, that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Or as we studied this morning, within the Bible mind, where the thoughts come from. Many of these Jews may have came to the conclusion that controlling their body was enough, right? Well, I thought about it, but I didn't actually do it. And Jesus says, no, the follower of God has to control both mind and body. And I'm going to give you some really quick statistics which shows that, one, this is still necessary today because this is still an issue, especially for those who are married. Let me give you just a couple of statistics. These are very recent, from the most recent polls I could find. 16% of married couples admitted to being unfaithful at some point in their marriage. Those are the ones that admitted it. 16% said, yeah, I've done that. I was unfaithful to my spouse. I'm going to assume there are many in there that did not admit that. 30% of individuals said they began cheating on their spouse with somebody at work. I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to give you another poll here in a little bit. The workplace is a danger for marriages. I don't care if you're a husband or a wife, the workplace is a danger. And I'm going to tell you that right now. 30% of individuals who did cheat started with somebody at work. According to research that I found, 57% of marriages ended in divorce due to adultery. Over half of people that were divorced said that was the reason. And I'm sure in many cases they may not have said that was the reason, but it actually was. 88% of ladies said they were more concerned or put more emphasis on emotional affairs over physical affairs, which I found that to be very unusual. I'm not condoning either one. I'm saying that in the culture today, women were actually more worried about their husbands having emotional affairs than they were actually committing adultery with him. Because in their mind, well, that was just a physical act, but the emotional is even worse. Do I kind of understand where they're coming from? I kind of understand it. Both of them are a problem. But the ladies were more worried about emotional affairs. I'm not going to spend time on it, but let this sink in for a minute. If a wife doesn't feel emotionally connected to her husband, and she's probably not physically connected either, can you see why she may be really upset if her husband is having an emotional affair with somebody else at work? Because in her mind, she's like, so wait a minute, he's giving the emotional that I should be getting to someone else, and I'm more angry about that than I am the fact that he's actually sleeping around or committing fornication? That's interesting. 60% of all emotional affairs started in the workplace. 77% of men, listen to this last statistic, 77% of men confessed to actually being engaged in an emotional affair. And you may say, why would women put up with that? Well, 91% of women said they actually have done it. 77% of men said, yes, I've had an emotional affair with somebody at work. 91% of women said the same thing. If you average it out, that's 84% of married couples have admitted to having emotional affairs with somebody else at work. And here's the thing, we know what happens because we use the term, I'm going to say it, work wife and work husband. How many have heard that? I see somebody shaking their head right now, right? That's my work wife. So is that the person you eat your lunches with and you're telling that person all the stuff you should be talking to your spouse about? And we joke about it like it's no big deal. The polls are showing it is a big deal, and marriages are being destroyed because of emotional because of emotional affairs, which, guys, it has to start somewhere, and it's the emotional affair that leads into the actual adultery. So I don't know if those numbers are representative of anybody sitting here right now, but here's what I do know. I do know that all men and women are tempted. I do know that the workplace is a serious place in which this is taking place. And I do know that our youth need to know about this, as well as we need to know about it, so we can look out and protect ourselves. Or, and I hope this isn't the case, if we find ourselves right now saying, yeah, I do have that work wife or that work husband, and I act that way with other people, that you're going to stop it right now before it gets any further, because this is a problem. So very clearly, yes, we've looked at the purpose of marriage, and we've learned there is a standard of purity for marriage, and many people are struggling within that standard. Now, let's go back and actually look at what marriage requires. Let's go on over to Matthew 19. We'll look at verses 1 through 9. This is a passage you all know about. Matthew 19, 1 through 9. And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these sayings, he departed from Galilee and came into the coasts of Judea beyond Jordan. And great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And they say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, Whosoever, this applies whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, you're under the law, you'll be judged by that, John 12:48. And I say unto you, Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Jesus begins to talk about the intent for marriage and commitment. Here's another interesting poll that I just found yesterday morning as I was digging through. Did you guys know that the lack of commitment is the most common reason for divorce? Most people think it's divorce. In fact, 75% of individuals and couples actually cited lack of commitment as the reason for their divorce, and that is even greater than those who were unfaithful. I find that a little surprising. They did not feel that their spouse was committed to them, and therefore they opted to get a divorce. Now, if you go back to the original poll that I gave you guys where I said many people are not marrying for love anymore, let that sink in for just a second when you say the number one reason people are getting divorced is they don't feel their partner's committed to them, yet we have a poll that shows the majority of people don't list love as the number one reason for why they got married. How in the world can you feel that commitment one to the other if the primary reason for even getting married in the first place is not love? We have some very disturbing statistics today within our culture. There needs to be this biblical commitment, and Jesus teaches that divorce for any other reason except for fornication makes any future remarriage adulterous. And so each person needs to enter into marriage with this idea of 100% commitment, and there's really just one exit plan. And that's death. And I don't mean like causing their death. I mean like they're going to die. They're going to die naturally, and that's it, right? And I say that, guys, because, well, I don't know if this account is true, but I heard that there was a lady who had shot her husband for walking across the wet mopped floor. And the officer called it in, and his superior had asked if he arrested him, and he said, no, the floor is still wet. If he had arrested her, and the floor is still wet. I use that joke to say there are an awful lot of marriages who are not committed, and they allow things such as wet floors and other things to cause them to leave. And it's extremely sad. There needs to be commitment, and there needs to be a dedication to preserve the marriage no matter what it is that you're coming through. Whether it's he walked across the floor again in his dirty shoes. We had that happen this week in our house, guys. Mud carried throughout the house. It could be a number of different things, but whatever it is that takes place, you need to have the commitment, I'm not going anywhere. Okay? We make a covenant between God and ourselves and our spouse, and we enter into the marriage saying, I'm not leaving. And if you're already married, I don't care what the problem is you're dealing with, the commitment is still, I'm not leaving. We're going to fix this together. We're going to fix it, whatever it is. And I know that's easier said than done. It's easier for those of us who have gone through the hard times and now we've come out, right? And we're doing much better. It is harder for those right now who maybe are dealing with something. I don't know how low it is for you. Whatever it is you're dealing with, you need to realize it doesn't have to be that way in a day or 5 days or a week or a month. It may take a while. But whatever it is that you're struggling with, don't give up. We enter in knowing we're gonna get through it together. If you didn't make that promise when you got married, you need to make it right now. Make that commitment. And if you're not married yet, you need to consider wholeheartedly who it is that you're looking at to marry, and you need to make sure that within your mind, one, it's somebody who's going to help you get to heaven, but two, you're not going anywhere. This is a one-time thing. It's a one-time thing. You need to be prepared. Let's go over to Genesis 2. We're going to look at verses 18 through 25. Genesis 2, 18 through 25. So we're going to start off with a biblical commitment to our spouse. But then we begin to learn a little bit more. Genesis 2, follow along with me, verses 18 through 25. And the Lord God said, It is not good that a man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an helpmeet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. And therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Verse 24, the man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife. I didn't write it down there, but again, go back to Matthew 19, verses 5 through 6. You'll find the exact same thing. The word cleave there, adhered, glued, joined together. Again, it goes back to that concept of I don't care how bad it gets, you're glued together. You are permanently adhered one to the other, right? You've even heard the phrase, right? They're glued together at the hip. Yes, Moses writes that they are one flesh. Now, clearly, he is referring to the physical intimacy ordained by God within marriage. But in verse 25, there's a very interesting statement. He says, Both the husband and the wife were naked in the garden, and they felt no shame. Well, there shouldn't be any shame, as the marriage makes the husband and wife one flesh. And intimacy is just a further expression of that closeness. It's not the only expression, but it is one of the largest expressions. Let's go on over to Ephesians 5. We'll look at verses 21 through 27. Ephesians 5, and then I'll pick back up in 28. He says, Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. You see that submission from husband to wife, both ways. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. And he is the Savior of the body. And therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. What is Paul teaching us there? Well, prior to marriage, and for those of us who can remember back that far, what were you worried about? Just you. Just you. It was me, me, me. Everything that you thought about was just you. I have a hard time even remembering back that far, guys. But here's the thing. After we get married, we become one flesh. There isn't any more me, 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 me. It's just us. It's just us. And eventually it's us plus the kids. It's us plus however many kids. It's us plus. Now, if you're married, this isn't unusual. I think most of us would say, I know what you're talking about, because the more that we learn as we're married and the longer we've been married, we realize how close we get. And again, you talk about how he talks about one flesh, and of course that includes intimacy, but you think about, that's such a small part. You think about the marriage where, as you're talking and you stop to take a thought and your spouse finishes your sentence, right? They already know what you're thinking before you even say it. And so you literally become so close because you know each other so well that you literally are not just one flesh. When we talk about that idea of one flesh, yes, that does mean intimacy within marriage, but there's so much more that's included in that. Guys, becoming one flesh has everything to do with sharing your lives together as a husband and a wife. You don't just share a home and a bed. Anybody can do that. Think about the things that you actually share that are important. Joy, sorrow, your hopes, your fears. Let me pause, and that's why it's a problem. If you got a work wife or a work husband, who are you sharing your hopes and your fears with? Is it your spouse? Are you depriving them of that emotional closeness you should have while you're giving that information to somebody else? You should be sharing your hopes and your fears, your most intimate thoughts, your desires, your wants, your successes, your failures. Of course, your money, of course, your possessions, your bodies and your souls. The idea of being one flesh includes more than we really have time to even sit and break down. And you should be sharing this with each other on a daily basis. In the process, as you do that, God begins to weave you together as one. Truly, you're two people, but you become one. That's how close you are supposed to be. And that gives us some more information, or at least clarifies what we find in Ephesians 5. Look at verses 28 through 30. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. And for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. As a husband and wife, you're to love your spouse as much, I say more, than you love yourself. And it has to be more. Most people say, well, you love them as much as yourself. You love them more than that. And you have to, because it's supposed to be a sacrificial love, right? Everything as you're thinking about is, what can I do for my spouse? You are one flesh, each of you carrying out your role within the marriage, and death is the only thing that's going to separate you. That is the intent of when you get married, that's how you should be thinking. Nothing is going to tear this apart except death. And as I said jokingly, not you causing their death. It's when somebody naturally dies. That's the only thing. I think we all know that here when we get married. But I don't think you really know that feeling that we're talking about here until you've been married for an awful long time. You know it, but you don't know it. You understand it when you get older. At least I can say for me, I understand it better. You also need mutual encouragement. We'll be done a little early, guys. Alex said the sermon was light today. Let's go on over to 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Wherefore comfort yourselves together and edify one another, even as also ye do. And you may say, that's not a marriage verse. The word here, oikodomeo, which means to confirm or build, is commanded of all Christians, especially those of us who are married. You're not going to have a very successful marriage if you do not continue to confirm and build that marriage on a daily basis. So let's take it to our daily lives as we're not of the world, but we can't separate ourselves from the world. I would say the majority of us are oftentimes beat up and weary and worn down, and oftentimes we want our spouses to really know just how tired, mentally, emotionally, and physically and spiritually we are. And in most marriages, according to statistics right now, at least one, if not both spouses work outside the home. Some marriages have a spouse working outside the home, the other spouse works within the home. Both situations have their difficulties and trials, especially for those who are working outside of the home, because they are in contact with oftentimes non-Christians and other temptations. But one of the spouses comes home and they talk about just how bad their day was. And here's the problem. You need to remember your spouse may have had just as bad a day as you had. And you may think to yourself, well, they were home all day, so it couldn't be that bad. Why don't you flip the switch and try it? I had a guy tell me the other day, he's like, yeah, my wife works out of the house. And he said, I had to do that for a while. He said, I never want to go back and do that again. I would rather come to a factory every day where I can leave the problems at home, deal with all my problems at work, and go back, right? Why do you think it's safe for him to go back every night? Have you ever thought about that? Why do the people who work outside the home want to go home so much after the day's over? Well, that's where it's supposed to be calm and everything's supposed to be done, right? Who did it all? Have you ever thought about that? Yeah, I don't either. Yeah, we don't think about that, do we? We're so eager. Sam will oftentimes say, how's your day going? And I'll say, I'm ready to come home, right? I didn't think about the fact that the house is clean because somebody cleaned it. I don't think about the fact that dishes are done because somebody did them. And I would say oftentimes we don't. We take that for granted. So you may say, I had a horrible day at work, and they may have had just as bad of a day. And yet, since marriage makes us one flesh, we ought to be able to get the sense that our spouse is struggling and needs encouragement, right? It shouldn't have to result in me walking across a wet floor and really making her aggravated. I should already see when I come in that she's aggravated, or you would hope she realizes I'm having a bad day, but oftentimes we don't. And this goes back to that constant dialogue I was talking about the other day. If we are not having those conversations, the deepest conversations on everything, both emotionally and on intimacy, if we're not covering all of that on a regular basis and do not have a thorough understanding of that, how would you know when your spouse is struggling or when they're upset? If you don't know what they need or what they like, how would you know when they're not getting what they need or what they like? That's a problem. So here's the question. I know I need to build them up, and I know they struggle in whatever area or avenue they're working. How do I build them up? Well, that depends. Depends on your spouse. I would encourage everyone, if you've not read it, I think I have a copy down in my office. Go back and spend some time looking at the book. Read the book on the 5 love languages. I think it does a good job giving a basic overall view of the differences in personalities. I'll give you this, the list of 5 there of what people, kind of how they break them down into categories. How do you build someone up? Well, it depends on what they need. Some people need, more than anything, just constant words of affirmation. Like they literally just need you to tell them. They could care less if you walked on a wet floor they just mopped and got dirty footprint. They could care less about that. What they want are words of affirmation. And I keep thinking about the movie Wedding Singer, when they're sitting there and he goes, all I really want is someone to just tell me that everything's going to be all right. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I just want someone to hold me and tell me everything's going to be all right. That's what some people need. That's all they need, really. They want words of affirmation. They just want to know that everything's going to be fine. For some people, that's not enough. For some people, it is the acts of service. It's the things you do and don't do. Don't walk on my wet floor after I just mopped it. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem. The words are not enough. They want you to literally show them that you love them. And you could be doing that by working outside the home, doing whatever it is around the house, doing chores, doing things that need to be done, helping them with their work if they're working within the house. Could be any of those things. And so for some people, they just want you to show them that you love them through acts of service. For some, they want to receive gifts It could be anything from cards to flowers to just something you made, right? It doesn't have to be anything fancy necessarily. For some, they might want gold. I'm just saying. But for others, it's none of those things. It's literally physical touch. Surprisingly, the numbers show that that's fairly large. They want you to demonstrate your love to them through acts of intimacy. And most people will think, oh, this is primarily a men problem. No, it's not. This is actually both women and men who fall into this category. And we're not talking about just the touching that takes place in the bedroom. We're talking about holding hands, being near each other, watching the rom-com that you don't want to watch, because being around them and just sitting on the couch spending time with them. That's what they want, physical touch and being near each other. We have to acknowledge that marriages do need all of these things, and all of that builds into, in some regard, what we oftentimes call romance. What's romantic to one is not necessarily romantic to the other, but that whole area of where we realize this is what establishes a close connection between us as spouses. It's what makes us one flesh. It includes both the emotional and the intimate. And guys, it's what keeps us from going to work and thinking or coming across with the idea that maybe it is greener on the other side. All of these things, depending on who you are, help keep you from doing that. And it's important. I'm going to end with the last one, sanctification for spouses. Very simple in 1 Peter 3:7. Peter describes spouses as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Our marriages are to be carried out in such a way that not only do we make it to heaven, but our spouses are going to make it to heaven with us. And so marriage needs to start off with that goal of mutual sanctification and righteousness. Now, I will say for many people that wasn't their goal. And if you know that, or if you realize that wasn't the goal, you need to right now make that the goal. I don't care how bad your marriage is or how messed up it is. You set the goal, okay, our job is for both of us to get to heaven, so today's the day we set the goal of we are going to be righteous and we are going to be sanctified individually and as a couple. We're going to help each other get to heaven. That's much easier said than done because we both struggle with different things. That also means we need to be continuously evaluating and reevaluating our marriage and our spouse's needs. And you may say, why? Well, your life's going to change. And it changes significantly, as I'm learning, as children grow up and move out of the house, as you have job changes, and as your spouse changes. I am not worried about the same things today as I was 8 years ago. And I find that I oftentimes have a lot more time with my spouse than I did 8 years ago, which is unusual. So I have to reevaluate and reevaluate and reevaluate as we change, as jobs changes and things change. So we all have to do that. Let me finish with this. In marriage, the little things are the big things. Let's start off by saying this. Remember, you are never too old to hold hands. Tell your spouse you love them every day, even when you're mad at them. Even when you're mad at them, say, I still love you. Show your love to them in some way. And I would, again, encourage you, if you don't know how they want you to show them you love them, have them read the book and sit down and have a candid discussion about the 5 love languages. Have the ability to forgive and forget. Always be the safe place for your spouse to come and talk about their deepest fears, their desires, their needs. They should be able to come in to tell you what some people would say, that's the most embarrassing thing I'd ever heard. You should be able to tell your spouse, and although they may laugh with you, you should be able to tell them. Right? You should be able to tell them. You need to be that safe place. According to the statistics, you need to keep intimacy at the top of your list to protect your marriage and feel connected. And I will say this, if it ever gets to the point where your intimacy is diminishing and you realize it and it's not for a health reason, you need to acknowledge immediately there's a serious issue. Because if you don't, it will build and build and build until before you know it, it's almost unfixable. And we've all known people who have fallen into that condition. Most important and last, be the spouse God commands you to be, and be the spouse that your spouse deserves. And again, that's much easier to say. But for you to do that, you need to study and spend time in the Word. You need to know what's expected of you as a spouse. And none of that really means anything if you're not a Christian and a faithful Christian, which is how we end our sermons every day. If you're not a Christian, you need to be. Nobody wants to die outside of Christ, and if you don't know how to become a Christian, it's very simple. We'd love to sit down and study with you. If you don't live around here and you watch us online, we'll point you to a congregation that can study with you. You need to know about Jesus and who He is and why He came. You need to have faith in Him as the Messiah, or you're going to die in your sins. Hebrews 11:6, John 8:24. You need to understand the danger and the consequence of sin so that you can repent, Luke 13:3 and 5. You need to confess Christ with your mouth, as we see both with the Ethiopian eunuch and as commanded, Matthew 10:32 and 33, also over in Acts 8. And you need to be immersed in water for the remission of sins. Very simply, that's what we're told by Jesus Himself, Mark 16:15 and 16. Peter says that in Acts 2:38. And we could give you many other verses, but it's a burial in water, Romans 6:3 and 4, in which you come up, and we know it's a part of salvation, 1 Peter 3:21. So if you're not a Christian, you're currently outside of Christ, and you need to become a Christian. If you are a Christian, one of the things you need to do is, if you're married, focus on your marriage, and if you're not married, start preparing yourself to be married. For most of us, we are married, and it's a big part of our lives. And so it's something we need to know a lot about, and it's something we need to be prepared to do. As I draw this to a close, if there's any way we can assist you, you can come forward as we're led in a song of invitation.